The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 28. Enter the Mists. Melchizedek was on his way to the Mists, the place where all souls found themselves after death. Melchizedek was enjoying the walk and the look on the faces of all returning souls who literally could not believe their eyes. Rather than joining him for their usual elevenses in the observatory, Alusha had decided to walk with the godson to go over issues relating to some spiralling hotspots that could overly affect the life plans of some souls inadvertently caught in the mix. The Department of Destiny Enforcement was on permanent standby. Their task was to ensure that every life plan of every participating soul was upheld. Enforcers always did their best not to be seen, but occasionally this was unavoidable. Much testimony has been gathered over the years from those souls in the physical who had believed they had been eyewitnesses to divine intervention of an angelic kind. Sneak peeks of this kind had always made the godson smile. "All good in the hood?" asked Melchizedek. "Yes. The Department of Regulation and Refinement is monitoring the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is getting heated. I have been informed that, should the egos of those leading the standoff rear up to objectionable degrees, some behind-the-veil coercion might be necessary." Possibly," said the godson. "We shall see. But in the meantime, we should have faith in the knowledge that course corrections do mean that all things together can be worked out for the good." "I know." Alusha and the godson continued much of their ascent, exchanging banalities, and then retreating into silence, and then again airing potential concerns and the treatments for them. The sun was warm and bright, but the higher they ascended, the cooler it became, and as they turned a bend, Alusha closed her eyes and breathed in the intoxicating aroma of gardenia. The white chiffon blooms contrasted illustriously with the deep green foliage of the leaves. Melchizedek bent forward and snapped off a large bloom, which he then proceeded to tuck through a strand of Alusha's hair. Another flower measuring over 5 inches in diameter immediately replaced it. Alusha nodded hello at the horticulturalist, who was on her knees planting a new crop of seeds that would eventually yield heavy purple blooms. The horticulturist looked at Alusha and the godson as if they were passing ghosts she had seen 1,000 times before. She then went back to the tilling of the soil with her fingers. A walking wound, thought Alusha, and she sent the haggard old woman her love. "She'll be fine," said Melchizedek as he squeezed Alusha's hand. "She has just returned from a very rough life in Spain. What else have you got for me?" "I went into Sarah's dream last night." "Good. How did it go?" "She is very angry, and pending events will compound that anger. I take it you are still intent on pushing her." "Yes, but it is not an eternal dilemma. Diamonds do not start off clean-cut and shiny. It takes friction to perfect them. Is there anything else I should know about?" "You know everything already. You should know that." Melchizedek laughed. "I have enjoyed our time together this morning, Alusha. Thank you for joining me." "Not at all. I only came because I enjoy the view." "You came because you enjoy me." "Enjoy your delusion," said Alusha, pinching the soft fleshy part of the godson's arm. Melchizedek immediately transformed the gardenia bloom in Alusha's hair into a mass of tiny white butterflies, which dispersed like confetti all over her head. He then continued his journey upward, while the Dreamtime consort turned back to begin her descent. She took her time, walking slowly and taking in the sights that only Starside's finest vantage point offered. The square, nearly half a mile below, was a bustle of activity, and Alusha noticed a guide holding the hands of 2 young children he was escorting to Eden, a sanctuary where their mother was convalescing. The children had returned Starside 10 weeks ago, but their mother had only recently returned. Their guide was about to witness a reunion. Reunions were considered by all of Starside to be the happiest occasion anywhere in the universe. The children's mother had never been the same after her twins were killed. 7 other kindergarteners had died at the hands of the gunman that day too. The gunman shot himself seconds before the SWAT team reached him in the classroom. The saddest women in the world attended their children's memorial service, but one was missing. She had not been able to get out of bed. She had not intended to kill herself, but she had not been able to drink, or eat, or move, or even think. It had taken 10 weeks for her life force to withdraw. Alusha smiled. The young girl was clutching a posy of lilacs she had picked for her mother, and the boy had drawn a picture of a galloping horse with 3 people on the saddle, a boy and a girl and their mummy. He'd loved colouring back at school, and his teacher had said he was really talented, but he hadn't been so sure. Not today, however. Today he was sure. Today he thought his picture was brilliant, and he knew his mummy would too. Alusha continued her journey downward, moving to the side to make room for those whose missions were speedier. The footsteps of a guide accompanying a wide-eyed young soul named Russell behind her obliged her to refocus. Russell had just completed another cycle in the physical. He and his friends had been experimenting with a substance called MDMA, and he had mixed it with alcohol and cocaine, but his heart was unable to take the strain. The young lad was bewildered by the fact that everything felt just as real as the place he had just left. "Am I on cloud 9?" he asked the guide without a trace of sarcasm. "Yes, Russell, you could say that," said the guide. "And don't worry, it won't be long before your memory provides you with all the answers you're looking for. Look over there. The view of Parish 4 is spectacular." "You've got to be shitting me." "Welcome back, Russell," said Alusha with a surreptitious wink. The lad spun around. "Who's that?" asked Russell, his mouth slightly agape. "An angel in disguise, I suspect. They're all over the place here, 2 a penny." The guide put his arm around his charge's shoulder, gesturing that he should look forward. "I have a lot more surprises for you, Russell. Do you think you can stand it?" Russell laughed. "Dude, nothing surprises me." "Look over there," said the guide, pointing. Russell gasped. "Whoa, what are they?" "The pathways that lead to the mists. We're on one of them." "Wow," said Russell as he gazed at what appeared to be a cluster of tentacles crawling with ants heading upward to a cotton wool canopy that eventually enveloped them all. "And over there, what's that?" "The first wonder of the very ancient world known as Inauguration Hall, Parish 7. It might take your eyes a while to get used to the light show." "Holy shit," said Russell, looking away and squinting, until another building recaptured his attention. "And that? What's that?" The guide looked in the direction his charge was pointing. "That, my friend, is the Department of Planning. Many regard it as the finest feat of architectural engineering in the local universe." "Local universe?" exclaimed Russell. "There's more than one?" Alusha continued downward, certain that Russell would keep his guide talking well into the night. As she began her final descent, nearing the pathway that led back to the square, she began to go over her evening schedule. She was scheduled to enter Russell's father's dream to reassure him that his son, despite having exited the earthly realm, was doing just fine, but she understood that his grief might keep him isolated from the reassurances of spirit. Melchizedek continued upward, at a purposeful but leisurely pace, making his way towards the place where miracles happened. As the mist came into view, he turned a bend and the home straight of the Appian Way. As he approached, the huge pearl gates opened before him to the accompaniment of harp music. It wasn't long before the swirling white mist enveloped him theatrically and entirely. The most ancient of music bearers stood to the left and right like sentries and continued playing as the godson passed through. For most, it was difficult to distinguish one music bearer from another. They were human-like in appearance, but taller and with much longer fingers. All wore white flowing robes, and above their heads rested a glowing white halo that acted as an amplifier. Music bearers never speak, they just play. And a countless number of the strange entities were currently gathered around a countless number of returning souls, One, 100-year-old toothless hag with crepey skin and open sores on her neck and arms. She was lying on the slopes in the same position she had died, her incontinence evident on her clothes. The old lady was in the process of being restored to her former 30-something glory, as was the case with all returning souls, except the lost. In most cases, their energy was too corrupt for the renewal protocol to make much of a difference. Melchizedek passed by the old lady, knowing that very soon her illnesses would disappear, as well as her deformities, wounds and scars. As mist swirled around him, the godson made his way further towards a region of the grassy slopes where the doubters woke up. All returning souls required specific and precise handling, but it was the doubters that required the greatest amount of mollycoddling. Those so certain that extinction was the only intelligent thing to expect after physical death could often be seen sitting on the slopes of the mists, rubbing their eyes and patting their bodies as if they were somehow in the grips of a wild and fantastic hallucination. Melchizedek came upon a soul named Richard. Melchizedek could see Richard, but Richard could not see him. Richard's guide was sitting next to his charge, waiting patiently for him to adjust to his new surroundings. Richard had just exited a life where he had been an acclaimed university professor and public intellectual. He had spent much of his life fiercely denouncing God, all gods, wherever, whoever, whatever and forever, and no argument ever presented to him, no matter how compelling, had never been sufficiently persuasive for him to doubt his prideful convictions. Little did he know that a lot of his egotistically achieved notions of how the universe works and the psychological projections of his own wounds had done little more than ramp up the fear that many souls already felt. Little did he know that he had lived thousands of earthly lives prior to this one and would likely live many more. Today Richard was squirming because the possibility that he might actually come face to face with his maker seemed very real. Melchizedek slowed down to listen. "Don't worry, Richard," said his guide. "He won't bite." "Who won't bite?" "God." "Where am I, for Christ's sakes?" "Starside, a processing plant for all souls coming and going. It will soon be time for you to take a look at the life you have just left, and then, depending on the amount of karma you have accrued and how ambitious you are, you may plan another, or you may care to enter one of God's many mansions and please yourself for a while. You are a free will creature of the eternal now, and so the choice is yours. Oh, and by the way, your father is very excited that you are back. When he became aware that your time was up, he rushed to Starside to see you. He's staying at the hotel." "That antagonistic old bastard, I hated him." Melchizedek laughed, but only Richard's guide heard. "I know, but trust me, Richard, base emotions like hatred won't be with you for too much longer." The totality of Richard's greater awareness was returning, but it would take some time for him to fully accept the fact that he was immortal, a concept he had once vehemently renounced as belonging to the minds of the delusional. Melchizedek continued on, passing by another soul named Jonathan, who had woken up several yards from Richard. Neither was aware of the other's presence. Jonathan had been a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today he was delighted by the fact that he had been right after all. He had known that something more existed beyond his life. Today Jonathan wanted to pinch himself, victorious that his sermons had been spot on. Little did he know that a non-believer had awakened just a few feet from him. Little did he know that all souls were saved the moment they were created. Little did he know that a lot of his sermons had caused a lot of unnecessary fear. Little did he know that he had lived thousands of earthly lives prior to this one and would likely live many more. Continuing on, Melchizedek approached a Buddhist monk who had just arrived, having peacefully died at the age of 91 in his sleep. On his 18th birthday, the monk had taken a vow of celibacy and silence, and from then on he had become so deeply withdrawn into his mind, no external suffering had ever been able to upset his equilibrium. The little monk had indeed fulfilled his life plan, and while living his hermetic existence, he was certain that after death he would be absorbed into some supreme spirit. Today the little monk awoke shocked to find himself in possession of the identity he thought would be stripped from him. The godson looked on amused as several music bearers continued to serenade the lively little soul. The little monk leapt up and began indulging in a strenuous bout of singing and dancing, patting his body up and down, ecstatic to see that he was intact. Melchizedek wanted to dance alongside him but restrained himself, knowing that literally dancing with God would be too much for the little monk to bear. Melchizedek continued on towards a sector of the mist reserved for the most troubled of returnees. Lost souls expecting to find themselves in some hellish inferno had the hardest time adjusting. To find themselves swaddled in the loving vibrations of the celestial kingdoms was alien to them. Because every lost soul had spent much of their existence groping round in the shadows of fleshy darkness, they were routinely put back to sleep on the slopes, occasionally for weeks and sometimes more than once, to adjust incrementally. The soul Melchizedek was looking for was wearing a bright yellow shirt. Lucero, Fernandez, Eduardo, Aguado kept his eyes closed. He was curled in the fetal position with his thumb in his mouth. The sound of harps and flutes and instruments not yet known on earth reverberated through his soul as he lay still, the residual fear of his last moments fading fast. Lucero was also adjusting to the happy fact that his body and mind were pain-free. The renewal protocol had been implemented and had worked, which was very unusual because most lost souls were unreceptive to it. The surrounding music was penetratingly beautiful, and after taking in a few long sweet breaths of the freshest air he had ever inhaled, Lucero opened his eyes for the first time since bleeding to death in the hotel room. He was shocked to see the silhouette of a very tall man looking down upon him. As the music faded away and the bright lights surrounding the man began to de-intensify, Lucero made the sign of the cross and began to tremble out of reverence rather than fear. The same Lord Jesus, as depicted in his mother's treasured oil painting, was staring down at him with a smile so beautifully benign, Lucero had to avert his eyes. "Welcome home, Lucero," said Melchizedek. The music bearers receded into the mists. Lucero had been raised in the Roman tradition and was overwhelmed but instantly comforted by the appearance of his saviour. Lucero did not know where he was, but felt alive and unburdened, felt a sense of liberty he had never previously experienced. He was uncertain of everything, but felt a brilliant love so profound he wanted to weep. The Messiah, one hand raised in blessing and his other extended towards him, wore a long white ceremonial robe, but his eyes and the kindness that radiated from them confounded Lucero. Lucero rose to his haunches and threw himself at Melchizedek's feet, clinging to the fabric of the angel of mercy who had surely come to redeem him. After allowing some time to pass, Melchizedek pulled the trembling soul to his feet. He embraced him firmly, infusing him with the loving energy of the divine, before withdrawing so a 3-foot space separated them. Melchizedek kept his hands on Lucero's shoulders and said, "You are cherished and you are safe. You are in the land of love and surprises. I am now going to take you to a place where you will no longer hurt and you will no longer be able to hurt others. All is well. I am here to help you, and so is everyone else you will encounter." "Help me do what?" said Lucero, perplexed, but for the first time in his life not afraid. "Many things, my child. You will first review your life, and then there are 6 women waiting to offer you their forgiveness."